Good morning. My name is Irene Mandl, and I will be the moderator for the next hour for Eurofound's webinar on the impact of game-changing technologies on work, employment, and the society. Please note that this webinar will be being recorded, and the recordings will be available on Eurofound's website in due course. Let me start with briefly introducing Eurofound. The European Foundation for the Improvement of Living and Working Conditions is a formal agency of the European Union, and for more than 40 years we have been doing research and the provision of information on a wide variety of topics dealing with labor market developments, quality of work, working conditions, industrial relations, social dialogue, but also living conditions and the quality of life. And given that we are in the middle of a transition to the digital age, for a couple of years, we've also introduced a very specific research strand exploring the impact of digitalization on work and employment. And what we want to discuss with you today is one of our research strands where we have been exploring the impact of game-changing technologies. And I'm supposed to be here today with two of our experts in Eurofound dealing with this topic of game-changing technologies. But talking about these sophisticated technologies, we do have some troubles with the more basic ones in terms of connectivity, which means for the time being, Ricardo Rodriguez Contreras, who's supposed to be with us, cannot connect. And I'm here with Eleonora Peruffo, research officer in our Working Life unit. And I would like to invite Eleonora to say a few words on herself to introduce you to the audience.
Good morning. I'm delighted to be here today to discuss with you the implication of game-changing technologies. And I've been working at Eurofound for the last on digital related projects for the past 4 years.
Thanks for that. As a note to the audience, while we are asking Eleonora to share with you her expertise and experience on the topic and provide you with some insights on the research that we have done, we would also very much like to get you interactively involved. So you see that there is a chat function, and you're very welcome and very much invited actually to post questions and comments in this chat function, and we will take that then up also in the discussions of the webinar. So let's get started. I think one of the key questions to address before we all can go into more detail is to get some clarification what a game-changing technology is. We know there is a lot of technological change going on, and this is not necessarily a new development. So what makes a technology so special that we consider it to be a game changer? Eleonora?
Yes. So we can talk about game-changing technologies when we speak about technologies which are a bit different from incremental innovation, meaning that they are technologies which bring innovation into the product, the process, or both, and they can also make a change, a complete change to the market, or open even a new one. So let me get more concrete with an example. The iPhone, when it first appeared in 2008, was not only a product innovation, but it was also it also opened up a complete new market, which was the markets for the apps. And then, of course, nowadays everybody is speaking about artificial intelligence, intended as a machine learning and deep learning, which is now changing business processes and the way they think about their production or their service. Artificial intelligence can also be thought about as a general purpose technology, meaning that its use enables the development of other technologies by helping this development through the use of algorithms and the analysis of data and information in real time. I would like to add also that game-changing technologies might have a very long horizon for their development. For some of them, for example, for autonomous vehicles, the car manufacturers in 2017, they were saying that we would have a lot of autonomous vehicles by now, and this actually didn't happen because there were some technical difficulties and also some type of regulatory issues which hindered the development of the technologies, which does not mean that it might not happen in the future, but still, when we talk about the potentially game-changing technologies, we need to keep this in mind, that the time horizon might not be the one that we expect in the moment in which we are making a possible forecast.
Okay, thanks for that. I think that was very enlightening. So at the end, it is about a radical change, or the potential radical change that a technology might bring about that we would classify it as a game-changing technologies. So now, as you mentioned about technical maturity, that we might not yet be there, and that it takes quite a long time until these technologies really develop and can be deployed in the economy. So would that mean we do not yet have a lot of them available?
Well, no, there are actually a lot of them, and the European Commission has identified more than 100. But as you said, it really depends on the maturity. Some of them are closer to the market, some of them are not. And usually in the technical world, we define the maturity of technology on a scale which goes from 1 to 10. And the 1 means that it's still at the very beginning, R&D and testing, while 10 is when the technology is ready for the market and for the deployment on the market.
Okay, so that means then also that there seems to be quite a high variety in terms of how mature the individual technologies are, and that not only generally, but also differences between sectors or where they are applied. So would you have a few more examples to make it more specific, more tangible for our audience?
Yeah, sure. So I propose that for today's talk, we speak about advanced robotics and 3D printing in particular, because these are technologies that we identified from our research as potentially game changes in a horizon from 5 to 10 years, which is a reasonable time frame when we speak about game changing technologies. And then we will also touch upon Internet of Things, which is strictly connected with the advanced robotics, because advanced robotics has essentially 3 characteristics. It's programmable, it can move in different directions, and it has a sensor, which is actually the Internet of Things technology.
Okay. Go ahead. I guess you have further examples for us.
No, you asked about the difference between sectors and countries, and I wanted to say yes, the landscape is very varied. So there are indeed differences between sectors and countries. We can, when we speak about sectors, if we take advanced robotics, for example, we know that advanced robotics is very used and at a very advanced level in the aerospace, in car part manufacturing and electronics assembly. But there are potentially game-changing effects, for example, in the food industry, where tasks which required manual labor are now being transferred to advanced robots, because they can now manipulate soft material. And they can also ensure hygiene conditions better, in the sense that there is no risk of contamination if the machine is there and there is no human. And also another sector where advanced robotics is potentially game changing is again in a sector where there is this improved capability of manipulating soft material, which is in the fashion industry, where clothes and shoes are now being treated by advanced robotics techniques, with advanced robotics techniques, and they can actually manipulate them better, even if there are still some technical limitations, because, for example, as far as I know, there is no robot yet which can tie the laces of the shoe.
Okay, so while they are sophisticated technologies, we are not yet there where we are in the sci-fi type of robotics. And you mentioned also earlier on 3D printing. I guess that's also a technology where many of our audience can deal with, have already heard about it. Could you give us a few examples how they are used and whether there also we see some differences between sectors or applications?
Sure. So, for example, of course, everybody knows 3D printing because of the domestic use, where it's widely spread and it's working. But in the industry, 3D printing is used not only for plastic material, but also for other materials such as ceramic and metal. But if you remember earlier on, I spoke about the maturity of the technology. So while for plastic, we are already at level 9 to 10. For metal and ceramics, we are depending on the product, we are between the level 3 and 7, meaning that there is still some fine tunings to do. Going more concretely into sectors, 3D printing is being used, for example, by General Electric to prototype turbines. And it's also being used in the biomedical sector to print 3D living cells. Of course, as I said, there is still some fine tuning to do, but it looks like it's a technology which is being used and has the potential to be deployed more.
Okay.
And finally, if I could also add, there is also in the fashion industry some application of 3D printing because of the capability of customization and the capability of 3D printing to print complex shapes, which traditional manufacturing has difficulty to make.
Okay, so I would summarize from what you have told us now that in principle these technologies would have a very wide potential for being applied, but they are still comparatively young. And there is still a lot of testing going on where they could be applied, how they could be applied, which of course also then gives a lot of potentials about how they could be further developed. So a lot of room for maneuver for the economy, and then also some implications, of course, on the labor market. Well, before we go into this question, what exactly that now means, I'll give it another try to see whether Ricardo is now with us in the meantime. Perfect. Yeah. Very welcome to that. Can you please give a few words to our audience about yourself before we invite you to also share your expertise with us?
Sure, thank you. First of all, do apologize for these technical problems. Not very unusual, by the way. First of all, my name is Ricardo Rodriguez Contreras. I'm working in Eurofound in the field of industrial relations, social dialogue, collective bargaining, so mainly in the collective employment relations field. And for years, I've been working also on the impact of technological change in employment relations. This is my background now.
Okay, thank you. In case you have not been able to follow the discussion so far, Eleonora gave us quite a good overview about what we understand by game-changing technologies, a few examples of them, and how they are or could be implied in practice, either in the economy or for the society. So I would like to ask you now, why is it important that we talk about game-changing technologies? What do we already know in terms of their implications that policymakers should be aware, while we have said they are still comparatively small in scale and not that widely deployed?
Well, basically, I don't know if it has been said before, and I'm comment before, but really what is quite clear now is that these game-changing technologies, along with other general-purpose technologies as AI and IoT, so they are changing the way in which we work, we consume, we produce. So this is why it's so important to analyze them, to follow up on them. So other than the technologies we have analyzed over the past years, probably the most important impacting issue is that they are the possibility they have to combine each other. So, and this is why this is very, very important to follow up in the coming years about the impact of artificial intelligence and other. So we are really facing a huge change in digitalization, in technological change, which is not new, but it has been accelerated over the past years, clear.
And as you just mentioned, this potential interconnectivity between the technologies, so would that then imply it's not only good to be aware about what happens with a single of these technologies, but also in their combination, kind of packages of technologies? Would that be something important to be aware of?
Absolutely. So this is why actually the businesses are thinking now again what is still can be done in terms of combination of these technologies. So we have bundles of technologies. Probably the most important challenge in the coming years is issues about interoperability, issues about standardization, for instance, which is very important in terms of work production. All the new business models require this type of policy approaches, because this is many of these technologies are still on early stages. On the other hand, we know what we have found in our research is that the way in which this the deployment of this technology will take place in the coming years is very uneven. It depends on the sectors, it depends on the economic activities, even it depends on the model specifications on each specific product. For instance, in case of advanced robotics, so we also have found in our research about that. So this is a complex, much more complex landscape than in the past. And also we have this issue of the pandemic, which has accelerated, of course, the deployment and also the research of these technologies in some specific sectors, not in all of them. Let's be honest too. So these technologies are not totally fully deployed. We need time in order to see how these technologies arrive to the markets, because that's the important stuff in here.
I think that's a message that we already got. There needs to be a little bit more patience before we can see them fully deployed and give the indications about what the effects would be. But nevertheless, as you now touched upon quite often in your intervention about the businesses and the enterprises, and that they need to be thinking about it, do we there already see some examples about the impact of the technologies on the business? So are there changes in business models, how they cooperate, and then also in a kind of a second step on that, do we know whether or not these game-changing technologies do have some impact on work organization, for example? So how production processes in the companies are organized?
Sure, of course. The issue is that because of these technological developments, many businesses are now rethinking how they design and how they manufacture products, for instance. So, for instance, the example of advanced robotics is a good one. So they were used usually in high production, but now it can also scale down to be used in low and medium volume production, manufacturing environments. So it has far-reaching consequences and implications to the overall assembly flow. Eleonora said before, for instance, in the case of the 3D printing, the additive manufacturing, which is still in the early stages, but really the printing capabilities, that the 3D printers capabilities are evolving very fast, adding, for instance, new range of materials. You can now print in almost any material you have, and it's becoming cheaper too. So it is very, very important, and also to get this product in the market, and of course to getting these printing solutions. So, for instance, one example with 3D printing is that now customers can even become involved in product design, in the finishing of the goods. So, and this is crucial. It's a really game-changing issue in terms of manufacturing. So, and for the businesses, it's a different way to think about how business processes are managed and delivered in manufacturing. And it also includes the supply chains and the distribution systems.
I see. I think notably the example that you brought about, I would call it now the co-creation through the customer, through the clients. I would assume that really has a potential of being a substantial change about how businesses are thinking and organizing their way of doing business. That said, would that then also imply that jobs as such change in terms of being understood as a bundle of tasks? So would there be different workflows? Would there be different profiles of these jobs in the companies? And if so, could we assume that this has implications on the skills requirements that are posed towards staff?
Yeah, certainly. So this has a lot of implications. This is already having implications, and it will come in the future. So if we look, for instance, at advanced robotics, both in services and in manufacturing, so the adoption is leading to transformation of the tasks that the workers perform within the job. So we already know a long time ago that a job is a bundle of tasks. So that's very important in order to understand what are the implications for the future in terms of changing tasks and not necessarily changing jobs. But it means basically that many tasks will be replaced, are being replaced already by another type of higher or even lower value tasks. This is a product, it's a consequence of technological change in terms of tasks. So a job might not be lost entirely, but the task content will change and will require new skills. And of course, this is a very strong impact for companies and for workers too. For instance, in manufacturing, in advanced robotics, 3D printing, and other technologies, new tasks require workers to upskill. So for example, in monitoring or in machine control tasks. And obviously, this may lead to job losses, but it will also mean that there will be new jobs or new tasks created in this process, in this transition period. This is what is important to know where we are. No, it's not a change that is taking place overnight. So it's a long period of transition period. What is important to remember is that the new jobs may not necessarily be carried out by the same worker, because the level of skills required might be different. For example, it's very widely accepted by many other researchers and agencies that there will be a high demand for software engineers, developers, data scientists, etc., experts in systems integration and other specialized professions. But in the end, we will need humans to work with machines. So that's the main message about that.
I think that's a very important message, and I think that's also what is very widely discussed in the policy discussion, that it should be about human-centered technological change. The human must stay in the center of everything. So you mentioned about the need for adaptation of job profiles, and that there is some risk that not everybody can make this change. I would like to take up on this a question from the audience. We have here Helen, who asks that in the field of digitalization, artificial intelligence, as we see it is coming, or it is already starting to emerge, that there is some risk of inequalities coming up and differences in terms of the distributional impact that this change has. So not everybody is affected equally, and some might be better off and some might be worse off. Do you also see that in your research?
Sure, yeah. Obviously, we will have the impact will be uneven. I have said before, as I said, in terms of across countries, across sectors, across activities, but also in terms of group of workers. That's the important stuff, no? To take into consideration in terms of policies, in terms of cooperation between management and trade unions, for instance. That's the big challenge. And I think that both sides of the industry are well aware of that, and they have this in the agenda. So, but certainly change in production models lead to change in work organization, working conditions, and clearly working time distributions, work intensity, for instance, using more machines, more robots in this case, autonomy, even health and safety conditions. All of them may be strongly affected with the arrival of robotics and other game-changing technologies. So we have analyzed, for instance, to what extent the impact of these technologies, of some of these technologies in working conditions. And our research has found that highly automated and programmable tasks are expected to have positive effects on working time, for instance, reducing working time, reducing work intensity, because basically they reduce the physical strain, so the physical burdensome task that can be now conducted or performed by machines. But also we have found that at the same time there will be likely to bring increased monitoring, reducing autonomy in terms of workers, and flexibility, of course, for workers. And that's all these factors are very important to take into account now, because we already know them. So we have found evidence research about that. Just to finish this part, for instance, something which very, very concerned for the coming years is the impact of health and safety factors, that also must be considered very, very carefully. So, for instance, it is expected that advanced robotics and other machines are expected to bring about negative psychosocial effects related to increased stress at work, or even decreasing quality of relationships and interaction, human interaction at the workplace. So this is an important field to take into account. Another one, which is very, very analyzed now and discussed now and controversial, really, is how these machines are collecting data, including those data from the employees and from the workers, so, which could be used for performance monitoring, and this data can impact on decisions taken by the employees. So all these issues are on the table now, should be top on the agenda for discussion between employers and managers.
Well, thanks for that. One question there, as you touched upon the topic of health and safety, I think this is a very relevant one. At the end, we are talking, at least in some of these game-changing technologies, of huge machines, which on the one hand could be a danger, on the other hand a benefit for that. And we have here a question from Beta asking, well, you already touched upon that, it is on the radar, but the question is, where exactly is it on the radar? So is it only in the workplace setting where you do something to make sure that the machine and the use of the machine is good and safe and contributes to the worker, or is it already included in the design of the technology? Maybe Eleonora, can you give us some hints on this? So is it a kind of a real thought-through system that these game-changing technologies are taking into consideration when then considering the impact on working conditions, or is it more at the end of the game?
No, I'd say I cannot give a definitive answer, but I would say that it really depends on where the robots are being implemented, because especially if you think about production belts, then it means that, of course, probably there is no need for humans to be around, and humans will be around only when the robot is malfunctioning or needs maintenance. And then if you think about other settings, such as logistics, for example, we know that now warehouses have been organized very differently, where autonomous robots go around, pick up the boxes and so on. And there is another setting separate from where the robots move, where humans perform their tasks. But then there is also another type of robots which we didn't mention earlier, and they are the cobots, the collaboration robots, which are robots which are meant to work together with the human. And there, yes, definitely there is some design inbuilt so that the there is no risk to the human, or the human is warned about the movements of the robots. And the robot is also programmed to stop, if the sensor perceives that the human gets too close or something like that, the robot will stop. So it's a very big range of application. It really depends of what the task of the robot is to be and what is the task of the human. In some cases, the machine works on its own, and then probably the access of humans to machine needs to be regulated better. In other cases, they work together, and then there is design there to make sure that it's safe.
Okay, thank you. I think that again shows very much the heterogeneity across the game-changing technologies as such and how they are and could be applied. To change the topic a little bit, it's not only technologies that can be disruptive. I think all of us have experienced in the last year a very disruptive situation because of a health situation and the coronavirus. And we have here one question from Matti related to that, who wants to know whether you have any indications, whether there are any connections between the COVID health crisis and the game-changing technologies. So is it that this situation pushes or reduces the development of game-changing technologies, or can you find very specific newly emerging use cases for these technologies as a kind of a response to the COVID situation? Maybe again, Eleonora, you want to give a start on this question?
Yes, I would say that especially in the field of healthcare, we have seen an acceleration of these technologies. For example, 3D printing has been used to print respiratory devices and masks, and even doors openers, which don't require the use of hands. So you use the foot to open the door. And then if we speak about the other technology we have mentioned, is advanced robotics has been used, new advanced robotics which can disinfect hospital wards and rooms have been used. They were in development, but they were not at the maturity level. But with the emergency of COVID, they have reached maturity because there was so much interest and they are useful. And at the point that in November last year, the Commission issued a tender for 200 robots of this type to be delivered across hospitals in Europe, in the European Union.
Okay, thanks for that. So I think there are things happening where different developments influence each other, and even more the point of seeing everything in a big comprehensive package. Maybe if we switch a little bit to a more macro level, we have here a question from Magdolna in Hungary, who inquires whether you have some information. We talked about the inequalities at the micro level among the workers, whether we can see some different developments across countries, and whether the increasing emergence and use of game-changing technologies could result in closing the gap between the advanced and the more countries that need further development, or whether it rather results in an even more spread of the developments. Do you have any information on this point?
Well, I would say that yes, it is a risk, clearly. So the way in which this technological change has been deployed over the past decades has been uneven, but it's also an opportunity. So I think that in terms of public policies at the macroeconomic level, I think the European Union is really fully aware of that, and it has really proposed to 2-3 years of big expenditure in terms of digital transition, digital transformation for the European Union. That's a risk, because what is clearly now is that not everyone, including firms, businesses, workers, and even citizens, has been able to benefit to the same extent from the development of digital change so far. That's quite clear. So we need to make sure that companies, workers, and society fully benefit from the opportunities and welfare brought by digital technological change. These are, we have at least one of the first pre-requirement, that is investing, that is funding. There is a huge investment planned for the coming years through the Next Generation EU and the Recovery and Resilience Facility. And this is the opportunity to really work together on that. But of course, technological change, different technologies, because we are talking about bundles of technology that can be, again, combined each other in a different way, also need some kind of technological environment to be fully deployed. And this is the risk to rise some inequalities or at least differences across countries and across sectors too.
And I think that also raises another interesting point, that we could probably assume that these technologies do not only have an impact on business and workers and the labor market, but also in the institutions, referring to governments, social partners. And we have here two questions from Tanya. One asking about what you know or what the impact on governance could be. So can they master to staying up to date with these developments, and probably also referring to regulations? Is there a specific need for new regulations or adaptation for regulations? And a second question from her dealing with the trade unions, whether you have some examples of what trade unions are doing to ensure the good working conditions and job quality at the workplace level if workers are affected by these new technologies. Maybe again, Ricardo, you want to start?
Yeah, well, in terms of changes in regulation, I think it's quite clear that some regulations in the field of work need to be updated and adapted to these technological developments. That's quite clear. I'm a little bit skeptical about profound changes. I think that, for instance, in terms of labor market regulation, we have a solid background in the European Union. So first of all, European Union legislation and national legislation is quite strong. We have also a strong tradition in terms of industrial relations, social dialogue frameworks, etc., etc. Of course, we need to make some adaptations to these new developments, but I think that's really much. And we are already seeing these discussions and controversies and how to regulate, for instance, platform work, which is quite obviously. And also we need also a new way probably of legislation in terms of health and safety, because there are new emergence risks that were known so far, and also the European Union level must update some of the existing regulations, for instance, on machines, etc., etc., etc. So that's I'm sorry, I don't remember the second question.
The second question was whether you see a special role for the trade unions or other types of worker organizations. And I would add to that from my side, both at the workplace level, but also maybe more at a meso level in terms of dealing with sectors. So is social dialogue changing? Are industrial relations changing?
Yeah, I would say changing as such. So I'll say that they are developments, and in some cases strong developments. Of course, I think that social partners are fully aware of these changes, and they are concerned and they are worried. We have at least an example at EU level with the European social partners signing this autonomous framework on the impact of digitalization, which is clearly trying to raise awareness and also to give some orientation on how to deal with this digital change. At the national level and even at the workplace level, at the company level, I think that we have also some developments. Collective bargaining is starting to deal with changes. It's true that in a different way, just we are again in a very early stages about that, but we see to what extent the impact of this technological change, of these game-changing technologies in working time, in work-life balance, for instance, and particularly in one very, very essential aspect, which is skills, policy skills. So probably the most important challenge that social partners and also governments and citizens as such we have in the coming years is how to update the competences and skills, how to upskill, reskill, how to really deal with all the needs that these new developments have at every level. That's very important. I think that we see some examples at collective bargaining, company level, in multinationals, but also in sectors. So, and this is the way in which step by step social dialogue is dealing with this, trying to manage this transition period, which is very complicated on the other hand.
Okay, thank you. And I would assume that the matter is even more complicated when we go beyond the national level and are looking at the EU level. So Bruno asks here whether you can say something about the role of the EU in game-changing technologies. So are there, for example, any support programs to keep the technology being developed, or any assistance maybe to small and medium-sized enterprises which might be in a more tricky situation of deploying them, or as you mentioned from the workers' perspective, any support like skills as you mentioned? Maybe Eleonora, do you want to start?
Well, in terms of monitoring and taking action to support the development of game-changing technologies, the European Union is very much following it, monitoring it, and is proposing legislation and initiatives to support it. Let's think about Horizon 2020. Let's think about the Green Deal, where 20% of it is dedicated to digital technologies. Let's think about the digital skills agenda, which envisages the upskilling of European citizens at all levels of education. So there are many programs. I'm not going to list them all. The strategy for AI. There are many, and then so there is both legislative support and also disponibility in the budget in order to support the development of the technologies, the adoption of the technologies, also for small and medium enterprises in terms of allowing them to be informed about the benefits of these new technologies for their production processes and their services, and also in how to adopt them. Because, for example, it's important for small and medium enterprises also to know how to implement these technologies. If you think about advanced robotics, it's probably a technology that in most cases requires a full rethinking of the production process. While if you think about the introduction of 3D printing and Internet of Things, from what we know, it's actually a more gradual implementation, which allows maybe a smaller investment a long time. So I hope
If I may add something about that. So I think Eleonora already has said that, but one of the key success factor will be the implication between the European and national industrial policy and technological change. That's very important. Also, there's also a lot of implication for the European Union in terms of industrial policy. But I also want to recall one question that was posed before in the chat, saying about I think it was about data. And really, that's very crucial issue. So I think the question was about, is data the new wave of change? To some extent, yes. Really, I'm fully convinced about that. But also, we are lag behind in Europe in regard to China and the US, and of course, one of the now the most important controversy issues is about how our data are controlled, etc., etc. So yes, I would say that also the Commission and the European Union is working on that. They have launched this digital package in terms of trying to organize the way in which business models based on data are taking place in the European Union. We have regulation proposals in terms of the Service Digital Act, we have the Governance Act, we have the Markets Act. So we have many instruments that are now being discussed, trying to organize a bit this one of the new elements that is really very difficult to manage at the European Union, because it's really a global issue as such.
Yeah. So would it be fair to conclude from that there is a lot of thinking, at least started, some initiatives started, but probably still some way to go before we can be at a sorted framework conditions? I have here one more question that I would like to take up, and maybe Ricardo wants to start with that, because I know that next to game-changing technologies, you're also working a lot on the topic of teleworking. And probably a big policy discussion there currently is about how can we deal with ensuring a good working time, and as a keyword, the right to disconnect. So Stenko, and sorry for probably not pronouncing that very well, asks whether you see some discussions coming up linking the topic of working time, right to disconnect, with the game-changing technologies.
Well, there's a relationship, sure, because all this digital transformation also has implications, as I said before, concerning working time and work organization, and of course there will be implications for workplace level. This is a topic which is interesting because on the one hand we have seen a lot of new developments because of the pandemic in terms of new regulations, not only legislation, but also regulations in terms of collective bargaining concerning remote working or telework. And it has raised the issue of the right to disconnect. And of course, you know that there is an opinion in proof in the European Parliament about proposing to discuss and to regulate the right to disconnect, which, by the way, is regulated in some countries, in some European countries already. So this is an issue that must be discussed. Probably we need a more clear landscape to discuss it probably in the post-COVID period, because now all the new regulations that are taking place, that have been adopted in the last months and will be another one in the next months, are much more influenced by the pandemics and the consequences of the pandemic at the workplace level. And this is something that we are now researching in Eurofound, the different scope, the different purpose of many of these regulations, not only legislation as said, so there are many developments that company in collective bargaining, and probably we need to discuss it in a post-COVID period, which hopefully will be quite soon.
Yeah. Well, I think that hope is shared by everyone, and I think also the policy discussion of how we can deal with the recovery out of the health crisis, while at the same time mastering the twin transition of digital age and the climate change, I think is very prominent on the policy agenda, both at the EU level and at the national levels. I would like to ask you one last question from the audience before we have to wrap up. And for that, I'll try to combine a question from Magdalena and from Bernard, who, I said, I try to combine them, asking, so Magdalena asks about what could be done for SMEs. Are small and medium-sized enterprises prepared? Are they already supported in this transition and in the deployment of the game-changing technologies, or what would be needed? And from Bernard, a question which goes into this direction: what could be done that the game-changing technologies really result in a positive outcome, as, for example, regards productivity or the quality of work? Do we there is something happening there? Maybe Eleonora, do you have a assessment?
Yeah, well, in terms of what to do with the SMEs, there are a number of projects also at the national and regional level, which aim to inform the SMEs and also to allow for implementation. There are, depending on the country, you can also look, for example, in our ERM support instruments database, where we have some examples of, for example, vouchers for small and medium enterprises, which can use some money from the government to get a consultant and get informed about what to change in their structure in order to adopt these new technologies. There are other instruments provided, for example, there is one in Estonia where the company can log into the government website and get an assessment of what needs to be done and what's their level of digitalization, actions they can take, and so on. So yes, there are initiatives. They are especially at the national, but also at regional level, because we know that yes, when we say that the development is uneven, development of game-changing technology is uneven, we do know actually that it is often concentrated in some regional clusters. So even inside the country, this is not something that we can say that it's homogeneous. And then the second part of the question was about
whether we can see some impact or some measures that maintain or even improve elements like productivity in the companies, which then also probably features back into the quality of work.
Yes, well, it depends. It really depends. Then I think in a very good and constructive social dialogue between the employer and the workers of the trade union. Because what we found out from our research is that technology is a tool, and the way in which it is used to improve or not working conditions is very much a choice. There are examples, for example, in the port of Rotterdam, which is one of the most advanced hubs for containers in the world. There they have implemented an autonomous driving vehicle system. So most of the trucks now do not need a driver, but there was a lot of social dialogue ongoing. And so what happened was that some of the workers were able to be retrained and now do remote control of the trucks, and some others, through social dialogue, were able to maintain their job until the end of their work career, so until retirement. And this was achieved through social dialogue. It's very much a choice, and that's an encouragement for everybody in order to make sure that the benefits of technologies are picked up at the most, are exploited at the most, and the negative effects are mitigated.
Thanks for that. Well, as said, we now are coming to the end of the webinar, so let me give a very quick try to wrap up what we have learned today from you. So I think it's important to take into account that change, innovation, notably in technological fields, it's going on all the time. It's not new. But what makes these technologies that we have been talking about today special is that they have a very good potential of being disruptive, either on businesses, production processes, but are also on work and employment, meaning employment relations, working conditions, but also not to forget the institutions. So also governments, social partners, trade unions were mentioned a couple of times. They need to be aware and they need to know what might happen, that they can continue doing good policy making in that. And what I would like to ask you now as a kind of a closing comment, would both of you give us one sentence, one key message that you find very important when we are talking about game-changing technologies, which should be the thing that our audience takes away from today's webinar? Who wants to start?
Okay,
Ricardo?
I may start. Okay. Well, basically, what I would say is that the way in which technology is adopted and implemented is not neutral. So nothing is set in stone so far. And we need to make sustainable this digital transformation, this digital change, to benefit not only workers and businesses on individual level. We need also that this technological change through social dialogue, collective bargaining, all the instruments we already know, must benefit our society and benefit us as European citizens.
Thank you. Eleonora?
Yep. I would say that game-changing technologies are fundamental for the future of the EU. They can help the EU to stay competitive at global level. And They can bring benefits to companies, as I said. They can bring benefits to workers, as Ricardo said earlier, in terms of diminishing the risks of health and safety, and the risks can be mitigated. So I think it's really, really important that game-changing technologies stay on the radar.
Okay, thanks a lot for the two of you to share your expertise with us, taking the time to talk to me and to our audience. I would also like to thank our audience for being very active and posing many interesting questions and comments in our chat. As we just had an hour and time, as always, was flying, we unfortunately did not have time to take all of them up. But we would like to do a kind of a follow-up. We provide a little document after the webinar addressing your questions and comments. This will then be published on our website, and you will also get a notification when it is done and when it will be available. On the same note, you find much more information, more details and various publications on game-changing technologies that are available on our website. And we are not yet done with the topic. So we keep on exploring it. And there, for example, is a report in production which will be published in autumn this year, which, for example, investigates the impact of the introduction of 3 specific game-changing technologies, namely virtual reality, 3D printing, and the Internet of Things at the workplace level. So what does it mean for work organization, job quality, but also, for example, the social dialogue at company level? So watch the space. There is more to come if you're interested. Our experts are also there for you if you want to exchange more bilaterally. And as a last point from our side, technologies and digitalization is not the only topics that we're talking about, and it's also not the only topics that we're doing webinars about. So the next in the pipeline of Eurofound's Ask the Expert events will be on the 29th of April, together with the Portuguese presidency in advance of the European Social Summit. And it will look at the challenges that the COVID-19 pandemic brings to the economy and the labor market and the society, how the recovery could be best mastered, notably also against the framework of the European Pillar of Social Rights. So if you're interested in that, also for that, you will find information on the webpage, or you can contact us anytime if you want to learn more about that. So thanks again for your attention, for your participation. Stay safe, stay healthy, and have a good afternoon. Goodbye.
Bye.
Goodbye. Goodbye.
Bye.
Goodbye. Thank you for your audience.